Hi friends, happy Monday. I hope you guys had a wonderful weekend. I am super excited to be back with you guys today because we are beginning a new story. The story that we will begin reading today is called When Marian Sang. And we are going to spend all week talking and reading about this story. Before we start jumping into the story though, we want to take some time to learn about some things that are going to be in the story. Marian is going to be the name of our main character, and she was a real person in real life named Marian Anderson. And we're going to learn lots about her, but one of the things that we're going to learn is that she was a famous singer who was Black, and because of her skin color, she faced many different challenges such as prejudice, discrimination, and racism. And part of the reason that she faced some of these challenges is because while she was alive, the United States had what's called Jim Crow laws. So we're going to spend a little bit of time learning about what the setting was like when Marian was singing and when she was alive so that we can better understand the challenges in our story. So as you guys see on the screen, the word prejudice is hatred or unfair treatment towards anyone who is different from you. In this case, we will learn that Marian experiences prejudice. People treat her unfairly because she's different. She has a different skin color. She also faces discrimination, which is the act of treating people unfairly because of their differences. This is very similar to prejudice. Prejudice is the feeling someone has if you feel unfair towards someone because they're different from you. That's called being prejudiced. When you do something, when you make an act of treating someone unfair, that is what's called discrimination. So the difference between prejudice and discrimination is prejudice is the feeling and discrimination is the act. And those are both unfair treatments toward people based on their differences. Which brings us to our next word, which is racism, or a belief that one race of people is better than another race that causes unfair treatment. So when one group of people thinks that they're better than another group, this causes them to not treat each other very nicely or very fairly. And we're going to see some of the ways that Marian experiences that in our story, especially because of Jim Crow laws. Now, after the Civil War, the United States had what were called Jim Crow laws, and these were unfair laws that discriminated against Black people. So as we know, the Civil War ended slavery in our country, but life was still really hard and unfair for Black people because even though they weren't slaves anymore, Jim Crow laws didn't let them do things like go to schools together or buy houses in the same neighborhood or use the same bathroom or water fountains just because of their skin color. And that's not fair. That was also a form of discrimination. And that was all going on, those Jim Crow laws, while Marian was alive and singing. So we're going to watch a short video to learn a little bit more about those Jim Crow laws. And then we will start talking about why Marian Anderson was such an important person and why she was so famous. So to mix it up, we're going to watch this video so you'll hear somebody different than Miss Papa talking. I think that will be fun for us today because it'll be something different. Listen closely so you can learn about these Jim Crow laws, and so when we read about it in our story, you know what's going on.
This is John and this is Adam. They are best friends. In school, they are learning about Jim Crow laws. Jim Crow laws were laws placed in the U.S. in 1877 and ended around 1950, but these laws became most prominent in the 1930s. Oh, my bad. I didn't even explain what they were, only when they were. A Jim Crow law was a law that legally kept colored people and white people separate from each other. Often the term separate but equal was used to defend these laws. Yet this was rarely the case. Though this is just one example of how these laws were unfair. Let me help you understand by doing a sort of time travel, if you will. Though this may not be a time that you boys will favor.
Keep listening to hear the examples of how those Jim Crow laws were unfair.
Back in the 1930s, these Jim Crow laws affected just about every aspect of life. Colored people weren't allowed to eat, sit by, ride a train with, or even go into the same buildings as white people. The same went the other way around. Oftentimes, the white people would look down on the colored people, sometimes with pity, but most often they'd look down on them in a lower-than-me way. As I said before, the quality of places meant for colored people were most often in worse condition than the places of the white people. There were biases in other areas of life too. Aside from the bias in what was considered everyday life, there was also bias with the crime system. Colored people were arrested for crimes and charged harsher than white people. There were many bad things that happened to people of color and white people who supported them. Oftentimes, punishment for this cruelty was either non-existent or not appropriate for the crime. The laws affected all of North America, but were often harsher in the South. They were harsher in the South because in the Civil War, the South fought for slavery and the North fought against it. In fact, the Civil War was the cause of the Jim Crow laws.
Alrighty, so that is all we're going to watch for this video to learn about Jim Crow laws. As you guys saw, there was segregation because of these Jim Crow laws. And what segregation means is when two groups of people are separated from each other, in this case, based on their skin color. So Black people were only allowed to use certain restrooms, certain restaurants, certain schools. They could only stay on certain seats on the bus. And a lot of those times, those places were not very nice. They were dirty, they were old. Meanwhile, white people had their own spaces, their own schools, their own seats, their own water fountains. And these were often much better. They were often cleaner and working better and not broken. And unfortunately, that was something that was not fair. That was unequal. And those laws started happening in the United States after the Civil War. So it's important for us to know that because as we read our story today, we will see that Marion experiences some of these laws and unfair treatment. But our story today is going to be a historical fiction. Historical fiction is a story created by an author that is imaginary, but the setting and many details are based on real historical facts. So in just a second, we're going to watch one more video about Marion Anderson, who is going to be the main character in our story. While Marion Anderson was real and many of the things that we are going to learn about was real, this story is not 100% real because the author might use their own words or their imagination to create certain details that are different from what happened in real life. But we can still learn about real things through the story. For example, some things that are going to be imaginary are the illustrations. The author is going to use their imagination to create illustrations in the book that might have looked different in real life. Same thing for some of the words and songs that we are going to read in the book. When the characters speak or when we hear a song, those might not necessarily be like they were in real life. The author is going to use their creativity to make the story better by changing these or making them better. And then we're also going to think a lot about what the character imagines. The author is going to use their own words to describe what the character imagines, also to better develop the story. However, we have all of these facts here on the other side about how Marion Anderson was a real singer. She faced discrimination based on her skin color. She was alive and singing during the Jim Crow era, which was when many unfair laws were passed, keeping Black people separate from white people and making their lives more challenging or unfair because of their skin color. And what's going to be most important for us to learn about while we read this story is that Marion Anderson was a leader for her people, and one of the most famous performances she had was at the Lincoln Memorial. So we're going to watch this super fun video. I think you guys will like it a lot to learn about what are some of the real things that we're going to hear about in this story that are going to help us learn about a very important leader in history.
The Wise Channel celebrates African Americans who did amazing things.
What are you doing?
I'm honoring Marion Anderson.
I love Marion Anderson.
Marion Anderson was one of the most celebrated singers of the 20th century.
Like many others, she sang at church. She was just 6 years old when she joined the choir at Union Baptist Church in Philadelphia.
Marian was such a good singer, the church raised money for her to take lessons from a famous voice teacher, Giuseppe Spaghetti.
Giuseppe,
Spaghetti.
Giuseppe.
Spaghetti. She went on to sing and kind of.
I want to pause right here to point out that while it might be fun or silly to listen to the Bitmojis singing in those high voices, the reason that they're singing like that is because they're singing in an opera style. And opera style singing is a kind of singing that you do on the stage where it sounds like just what you hear with those long, high-pitched singing. And that's the type of singing that Marian Anderson did. So while it might be kind of fun or silly to listen to it, keep this in your brain so when we're reading about how she sang, you have an idea of what opera music is like or what opera singing is like.
Hall. Then she went on a tour through Europe.
She was denied singing in Washington, D.C. at Constitution Hall. The owners of the hall said, "No black people are allowed at all."
But First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt stepped in. She invited Marian to sing in front of the Lincoln.
So this is an example of discrimination that Marian Anderson faced, and we'll learn more about this, but she was sometimes not allowed to sing at places because of her skin color. However, during this time, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, or FDR, was the president. This lady right here next to Marian Anderson was Eleanor Roosevelt. And because she knew that Marian deserved to perform and that the color of her skin didn't matter, the First Lady invited her to come perform, even though Marian wasn't allowed.
Memorial.
75,000 people came to hear her sing, and millions more listened on the
Radio.
The what?
The radio.
It was a hit. She did a great job. Later on, she sang for President Kennedy at his inauguration.
She was the first African American to perform at the White House.
She received the Presidential Medal of Freedom.
Marian Anderson did not let her challenges stop her. With joy in her heart and a song in her mouth, she became one of the greatest singers of the time.
All right, friends, we are going to stop the video there, and I want you to keep in mind what you learned about Marian Anderson as we begin to read our new story.